Hi everyone, and welcome to session 3 of our online Lent course for this year, all about unanswered prayer. Today we're coming from the dining room of the manse, being as there are music exams over at the church. But today's session is perhaps the most difficult. It's based on Good Friday and the death of Christ on the cross. We're reminded of those words that Jesus uttered, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this leads us to ask ourselves certain questions during our own times of pain and suffering. Why am I suffering? Why am I going through this? Why is God letting this happen to me? But before we watch the video, let's offer this time to God in prayer. Let's pray together. God of all time and of all space, God of every situation, and of the very creation of the world. As we explore this next session of Prayer Course 2 on unanswered prayer, we pray that you will guide our time by allowing us to be sensitive to one another's needs, and to be understanding that some of the questions that will be raised may bring a great deal of pain to some. As we think about the events of Good Friday and the suffering of Jesus on the cross, remind us, lest we forget, of the enormity of what God did through Christ that day, and that God understands and feels the pain that we feel, almost more than we do ourselves. We acknowledge that there are some situations and some questions that will never be adequately answered, and we ask for your help in getting us to that place where we can accept that reality, however hard it may be. But we offer this time, we offer ourselves, and we offer our prayer to your praise and to your glory, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So we watch the video for session 3.
Hello and welcome to session 3 of the prayer course part 2, Unanswered Prayer. Last time we looked at Maundy Thursday and how to process the pain of unanswered prayer in a way that is healthy. Today we move on to Good Friday. So from the how question to the ultimate why question. Why does God permit suffering? Why does he sometimes seem so far away? Why do my deepest prayers remain unanswered? And so, to help us think through these enormous questions, I'm joined once again by my friend Pete Gregg, author of God on Mute, the best-selling book that accompanies this course. Hi, Pete, welcome back.
Thanks, Gemma. It's great to be back. And this feels like a really big one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If God is all-loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful, why does he allow so much suffering? And of course, this isn't just some theoretical conundrum for a little polite conversation. It's deeply personal for every single one of us. So for me, right now, today, I'm thinking about a little girl in our church. She's just 17 months old, and she's just started suffering multiple seizures every day. And we've prayed, and so far she's just getting worse. So why?
I hear you. I've been praying for years for some Christian friends of mine who would just love to be married and meet the right person. And I know it might seem like a small thing, but actually to them it's really massive.
Yeah, of course it is. Another one for me right now would be one of my mentors, Floyd McClung. If anyone's reached chapter 6 of God on Mute, they might remember the story I tell there about the miraculous healing of both Floyd's daughter, Misha, and his grandson. But right now, Floyd himself needs healing, and it's just not happening. He's been lying partially paralyzed, unable to speak for a couple of years. And I've wept, I've cried out to God for him. I've asked God either, would you just heal him or take him home? Just release him one way or another from this horrible, locked-in state. And people all around the world have been praying similar things, and it just isn't working. Nothing's changing. And really, why? So let's turn to the Bible and the ultimate why in human history. This is Mark chapter 15, and we're going to start reading at verse 33. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Oh, it's harrowing, isn't it?
It really is. And isn't there something about hearing the original Aramaic that Jesus spoke, praying to his Father, and the stony silence from heaven in response? Raniero Cantalamessa, who's preached the papal household, he says of this moment, Christ became the atheist. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah, and yet he's articulating the universal question that we all ask. Why have you let me down, God?
Yes.
Why have you disappeared when I need you most? Why am I having to suffer?
Absolutely. And before we can get into answering those questions, can I just please give a quick disclaimer? There's a limit to what we're going to be able to cover in 20 minutes. So this is going to be pretty basic. Hopefully, people can go much deeper if they're in discussion groups, or they can check out one of the absolute classics on these subjects. There's C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain, Elie Wiesel's Night, that is harrowing. The Crucified God by Jürgen Moltmann, that's more theological but brilliant. And then this one, Luminous Dark, which is by Alan Emerson, who's the guy that we're going to be interviewing, I think, later.
Okay, thanks, Pete. So the disclaimer has been noted. We won't expect you to solve the problem of evil in 20 minutes.
Phew. Well, in that case, let's start by breaking our questions about unanswered prayer down into three categories. You might have heard me talk about this before. God's world, God's will, and God's war. So first of all, let's just think about God's world. Okay, so God has established certain principles, laws of nature, laws of science, and moral laws too, that just make the world work wonderfully well, actually, for most of its 7.8 billion inhabitants. So it's almost like miraculous. A proton is attracted to an electron, or the Earth is attracted to the gravitational pull of the sun, which keeps us in orbit. We're part of this mind-blowingly complex, breathtakingly beautiful system, which does actually make life work for most people in most places, most of the time.
Okay, I get that, but what does that have to do with prayer?
Right, well, a miraculous answer to prayer is, by very definition, God breaking one of his own laws of science or nature.
Okay.
And so we shouldn't expect him to behave like some mad inventor, continually tinkering with his creation. And he's not a control freak either. He's not like one of those helicopter parents who just sort of pounces from the sky every time I might possibly make a mistake or get myself hurt. Most of the time, God just sort of sits back and lets nature take its course.
Okay, I get the complexity thing, but what does this actually mean in practice?
Okay, so bear with me here. 2 facts about the UK. Firstly, it rains 133 days a year, and there are 767 weddings a day. So I want you to do a sum on this, if that's all right. Can you get your calculator?
Okay, yeah.
And so you need to do 133 times 767. I can't work that out in my head.
So that's 102,011.
Okay. So there are approximately 102,011 soggy weddings every year in the UK.
Yeah.
And Sammy and I certainly had one of them. Do you want to see a picture?
Oh, yes, please. I love wedding photos. Let's have a look.
Well, you're very nice. So this is our, yeah.
Ah, look at you two.
It's embarrassing,
Ah,
really, isn't
you're like kids. Look at you.
it? Yeah, I had bad hair. Sammy had a big dress, and we were the happiest people in the world. This was literally the only moment in the day it stopped raining, and we just rushed outside to get a snap.
Oh, so cute.
So apparently ours, I now know, was one of 102,011 wet weddings that year. So let's now just assume that maybe 2,000 of those soggy couples are weirdos who wanted it to rain on their weddings, and only maybe, let's say, half of the others actually bothered to pray for sunshine. So that would still be more than 50,000 brides and grooms every single year whose prayers go unanswered. Yes, it's the most special day of their lives and they've had an expensive hairdo. Yes, God loves them and wants the best for them. But no, he chooses not to turn our green and pleasant land into the Gobi desert just to improve their wedding snaps.
So what I'm hearing then is that maybe I shouldn't expect so many miracles because they have to be the exception to the rule rather than the norm.
Exactly. Miracles have to be rarer than we want them to be. Actually, rarer, let's be honest, than we sometimes need them to be. And definitely rarer than some preachers make them out to be. And this isn't because God doesn't love us, but because his world is infinitely complicated.
So I get this if we're talking about something that's fairly inconsequential, like sunshine on your wedding day or a promotion at work or your team winning a game of football. But surely when we're talking about more serious things like your friend Floyd lying in a coma or that little girl that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
then surely that's different. I mean, Jesus did a lot of miracles for people in exactly those kinds of situations. He didn't say, I love you, but my hands are tied. He healed them.
Yeah, you're right. And the argument about God's world, it is important in understanding some of our unanswered prayers, but it only takes us so far. And so that's why we must now move on to consider two other major variables, which is God's will and God's war.
Okay, so why don't we talk about God's will first, yeah?
Okay, so in John 14, Jesus makes the most amazing promise. He says, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these. So this is one of those verses that assures us as followers of Jesus that we can expect to do miracles. And not just little miracles either, greater ones than Jesus, he says. But then Jesus continues with a condition that we often ignore. He says, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. And then he drives it home because he reiterates both the promise and the condition. He says, you may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it.
So what you're saying is that the promise is conditional upon our prayers being made in the name of Jesus.
Exactly, yeah.
And then praying in the name of Jesus means?
Praying in the name of Jesus means lining up my desires with his desires and my prayers with his purposes.
Okay, but how do we work out what the purpose of God is?
Good question. Maybe the best way of answering that is to let you in on a little family secret, okay? Sammy is the slowest person in the world at choosing food in a restaurant. It drives me absolutely crazy. She's an Enneagram type 9, if that means anything to you. So to keep myself sane, I've developed a little game to guess what she's about to order. And I'm good at this game, okay? 9 times out of 10, I get it right. I could never have done this when we first got married. But the more time I spend with Sammy, the better I understand how she thinks and what she wants in any given situation. And so it's exactly the same with God. The more time I spend with him, the better I understand his will, what he wants. And practically, this means reading and absorbing his self-revelation in the Bible. It means making time to listen out for his still small voice in prayer. It means spending time with those who know him better than me. And if it's a big, fat, directional thing, then I need to seek wise counsel from other people as well.
Okay, so understanding the will of God can be a gradual, intentional process.
Yeah, and I like that you said intentional there, because it really actually does take effort as well as time. Some people have been Christians for decades, but they don't really know God at all well. And others, they push hard into his presence. They mature quickly and they get good at knowing what God's will is.
But when tragic things happen in spite of our prayers, surely we then just can't shrug our shoulders and attribute everything to the mysteries of some unfathomable heavenly master plan.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And then if I pray for my friend to become a Christian and she's still not interested after all these years of praying, but surely that's in line with God's will for her life. So why isn't it happening?
It's so important to remember that prayer isn't binary. And so let's just think about your friend that you're praying for. There are at least 4 different variables that come into play every time you pray for your friend. So firstly, in prayer, there is your personal will at work, right? So what you want in the situation. And in this context, that's your friend getting saved.
Yeah.
That's super simple. Secondly, there's God's will. And that's a variable because it isn't necessarily the same as your will, right? But in this particular instance, since 2 Peter 3 verse 9 says clearly that God is not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance, we can safely assume that God also wants your friend to get saved. So what's the problem here? You are clearly praying in line with God's will for your friend. So why isn't it working? The problem is that there are 2 other wills also at work in this situation, okay? So firstly, there's the will of your friend herself, and God will not and you cannot override her ability to make choices, even when they're bad ones. And then finally, there is the disruptive willpower of the one that Jesus calls a liar and a thief. This means that frustratingly, you can't force your friend to do an alpha course, no matter how many Bible verses you quote, how much you fast. But you can increase her chances of getting saved by influencing her environment through the power of prayer.
That's really helpful. Influence rather than control. I like that. But what does that mean for you guys in your situation? I mean, when Sammy was having a really bad seizure, I mean, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but surely you didn't conclude that it was God's will for her to suffer in that way?
Honestly, some people did say as much, that God was sending these seizures to teach us something. And I just don't buy it. I just don't believe there's anything new that God wants to teach us through yet another agonizing fit. God's not like that, you know?
So how do you make sense of it then?
Well, first of all, I think Sammy and I have learnt to be quite stoic about the state of the world. Creation's clearly broken. Sickness and death affect everybody. And as Christians, we're not immune from that. So I think I mostly just see Sammy's condition in terms of God's world, like, with certain aspects of God's war, actually, because there have definitely been moments that we felt under some kind of specific, quite evil attack. But as well as God's world and God's war at work in our situation, I've also come to recognize God's will in it too. Actually, I don't find this easy to talk about. It's taken me years to be able to say this, but 20 years into this chronic condition, we can both see quite clearly how the Lord has repurposed Sammy's pain into something meaningful and even beautiful. It's like the oil press in that last session. Do you remember? Did God put the brain tumor in Sammy's skull? No. Did he plan for her to have epilepsy? Absolutely not. But is it his will to turn her suffering into something good? Yeah, I think it probably is.
Wow. I felt like the God's world argument was relatively straightforward, but this one around God's will it's just incredibly complex.
Absolutely. There's all these variables, right? And
Yeah.
the will of God is often far darker and more painful than we imagine for reasons we can't immediately understand. Just look at the cross.
In your book, God on Mute, you talk about a story which resonates with me as a mummy about your little boy getting chickenpox.
Yeah.
And I found that very helpful.
Okay, yeah, that story. That was Danny.
Yeah.
He was a tiny baby. Sammy was in and out of hospital at the time, so I was primary carer, and yeah, he got chickenpox. He was covered in those horrible itchy spots. Absolutely nothing I could do but pace up and down with him in my arms until he cried himself to sleep. And I remember just desperately wanting to tell him, it's going to be okay. You know, you're not always going to feel like this. You might even be getting immunity for later life. Obviously, I couldn't. He's a baby, can't understand anything. And the weird thing is that Danny's now actually a strapping young man, and he's studying medicine at uni. He's actually specialising in immunology.
Wow.
So he understands viruses from COVID-19 to chickenpox better than me. But back then, he couldn't understand a thing. All he could do as a baby was allow his dad to comfort him.
That is so lovely. So what you're saying is that sometimes when we don't understand God's will and we're in terrible pain like Danny was, we can still trust that the Father understands things that we can't understand.
Yeah, and we can still lean into his love. Kids are just really good at trust. But then when we grow up, we suddenly expect everything to be understandable. And if we're not careful, we lose our capacity to trust. There are some things we just won't ever understand in this life, obviously. And we've got no option, therefore, but to trust, like Danny. Or do you remember Bob Sorky in our first session when he said, I don't understand you, but I love you?
Yeah.
In God on Mute, I identify no fewer than 16 reasons for unanswered prayer. But then the 17th is none of the above. Right? Sometimes we just can't make sense of the things that we're going through. We can't see any reason why God would say no to our prayers. We can only trust. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror, says the Apostle Paul, and then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known.
That's a beautiful assurance that one day we will understand, but for now we have to be like baby Danny in your arms. So You've talked about God's world and God's will, but what about God's war?
So the Bible clearly teaches that some of our prayers aren't answered, even though they are fully in line with the will of God, because there's an enemy at work in our world, resisting, opposing, and attacking God's goodness. In other words, we live in a battle zone. And as Christians, we aren't shielded from collateral damage. In fact, we can often be the targets. We see this battle in the prayer life of the biblical character Daniel. The answer to his prayers on one occasion was delayed by a mysterious spiritual battle between the archangel Michael and the prince of Persia. Then in the New Testament, the Apostle Peter uses equally dramatic language, describing how your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And the Apostle Paul attributes our struggle to the powers of this dark world and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Now, Pete, I know that all this is in the Bible, but if I tried to explain some of these concepts to my next door neighbour or to a colleague at the BBC, then they'd probably think that I've been watching far too many Marvel movies or something.
Well, first of all, there is no such thing as too many Marvel movies. But secondly, and a little more importantly, evil is clearly a reality in our world. I think most people can see that. So we'd better know how to take a stand in prayer. I mean, when a child is trafficked and tortured, or a thief attacks a vulnerable old man in the street, or a mother is killed for the colour of her skin, these things clearly don't reflect the heart of God, right? They're the absolute antithesis of God's will. And yet we tend to automatically blame God for everything that goes wrong in our lives, when most of it is actually enemy attack. So we need to stop fighting against God and start fighting with God against the enemy of our souls.
This is obviously a massive subject, and there's so many more questions and things I'd like to discuss, but I know there's a whole section in God Unmutes, isn't there, about spiritual warfare?
Yeah, I think it's chapter 10, if I remember rightly. And there's also a whole section in the first prayer course as well.
Great. Okay. Well, now I think it's time for today's special guest, who I believe is a good friend of yours.
Yes, this is a guy called Alan Emerson. And when I first met Alan, he seemed to have everything together in his life, really. He was super cool, super fit, semi-professional football player. His faith was strong. He was a natural-born leader. And he had just married a beautiful Irish lass called Lindsay.
For many of us, we do dream about meeting our perfect spouse. So tell us about what happened on your journey together.
So when we got married, we actually wove into our vows the John chapter 3, the verse in John chapter 3 about how the Spirit is like the wind, and you never know where it blows from or where it blows to. And so, our heart's desire was really just to be blown by the wind of the Spirit and to kind of go on that level of adventure together. Just a year after we were married, Lindsay started to take really sore heads. And we couldn't get to the bottom of them for about a month, and then we worked out after a month we were told to go for a scan just to check that everything was okay. And when we went for a scan, we realized that Lindsay had a brain tumor, and because we were so young and naive and carefree, I suppose, still at that age, we didn't realize that we knew it was serious, but we thought we'll be okay. And within a few days she was in surgery, having open brain surgery, and then she recovered pretty well and pretty quickly, even though it was really, really big and traumatic. That was September 2006. And then by the end of 2006, we thought she was getting better, but she took a couple of seizures and then had to have more brain surgery. And then we entered into 6 weeks of chemotherapy and 6 weeks of radiotherapy every day. And then she just got steadily worse and worse. And by April 2007, 22nd of April 2007, I just woke up beside her. She was sleeping in a kind of hospital bed in her mum's room, in her mum's home, which we'd moved into. And I literally watched her take her last breaths. And she died. And I didn't know what I was going to do, really. I didn't think I was going to make it. And it was just plunged into just an incredible torrent of grief.
Did it leave you questioning God's will for your life as a couple, because it felt as though you were so supposed to be together?
Yeah, I think my overriding feeling in terms of my relationship with God, there was obviously, just the sheer pain, physically, emotionally, in spirit, in every way you can feel things, you were feeling pain. And then as I tried to wrestle my relationship with God and faith and why this had happened and all of that, I think my overriding emotion with God was just one of sheer disappointment. It just didn't make sense why God didn't heal her.
And when we look at God's world and how he's the creator and yet can also jump in and change a situation, that disappointment must have felt really deep.
Yeah, like I wrestled with that for days and weeks, years. I think I came to realize that, in some ways there's still mystery to that. I still probably don't understand how it was better for Lindsay not to be healed. I don't understand all that. I found myself realizing that I needed to embrace the mystery of God in that, but not in some kind of vague, ethereal kind of way, in a very presence-centered kind of way, and that mystery was ultimately love. And I found my head going to a place where it concluded that there must be something so beautiful and mysteriously woven by grace that I have not yet fully discovered about all of this. As I process my grief, which I'd encourage anyone to do, give voice to it, learn how to pray out my pain. As I did all of those things, a level of perspective, if you like, started to come where at one point in the initial days, I really, felt the injustice of what was happening to me. That started to develop into a place of God allowing me to be the one to love Lindsay and to be one with her and to love her through a sickness that was going to take her life.
How do you feel like you were able to see that grace growing in your life in that winter period?
The nights were the worst, and you would find yourself just lying in bed, and noises would just leave your body that you couldn't actually really control. And it was just a deep, deep ache that just left your body. And in those nights, the tears used to run out of your eyes down into your ears, and you can always remember that sensation of your ears just being filled with tears. And often what would happen was I wouldn't even have heard him come into my room, but my dad would be sitting at the edge of the bed, and he'd just be weeping, and in the dark there was the presence of another. And I think what I came to realize was, the silence does not mean absence, that the ministry of presence is greater than the ministry of words and transcends the ministry of words. And so just becoming aware of a deep, almost eerie sense of God's presence surrounding and shrouding over me in those days. And that was kind of epitomized by my dad in those dark, dark nights. And my dad never really said anything, as I've said, but on one particular occasion, he kind of knelt over my bed and he said, "Son, if I could take this for you right now, if I could receive this, take this into my body and alleviate you from the pain that you're going through, I would do that. I just want you to know I would do that." And I think he just wanted me to know that, and in those moments, what I came to realize was that's the heart of God right there. And yet in his humanity, my dad couldn't do that. He couldn't take it away, even though he wanted to. But I suppose the point that I like to try to make at this point is that Jesus could, and Jesus did. He did take it into his own body. He did do something about it. And it's not that we don't go through pain, but we have one who goes through it with us. But I think the thing that I learned most about that period was Jesus just didn't turn my life around. And he didn't just give me answers, and he didn't just give me gifts, but he gave me himself. And that is what I think living the resurrection is, that in all of this, God doesn't give us answers or quick fixes or a few gifts just to get us through. Ultimately, God gives us himself.
Alan's story just gets me every time.
Mm-hmm.
I remember praying with Lindsay shortly before she died, and then actually praying with Al a few weeks later outside an Irish pub in the rain. And we've been listening to Bruce Springsteen singing "Oh, When the Saints Go Marching In." And Alan had been showing me pictures of Lindsay's final days. And I remember I just felt heartbroken, but also felt kind of guilty in a way that Sammy had survived a brain tumour and his wife hadn't.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And yet, amazingly, there's just no hint of bitterness in him at all, is there?
Yeah, that's right.
And I kept thinking of your God's world, God's will and God's war. And I realised I could definitely see all three at work in his situation.
Well, speaking of God's will, I want to finish now by praying a beautiful prayer of relinquishment. The words are going to come up on the screen. You may like to open your hands on your lap as a sign of surrender and join me in praying out loud, if that's appropriate where you are with me now. Today, O Lord, I yield myself to you. May your will be my delight today. May you have perfect sway in me. May your love be the pattern of my living. I surrender to you my hopes, my dreams, my ambitions. Do with them what you will, when you will, as you will. I place into your loving care my family, my friends, my future. Care for them with a care that I can never give. I release into your hands my need to control, my craving for status, my fear of obscurity. Eradicate the evil, purify the good, and establish your kingdom on earth for Jesus' sake. Amen.
Amen.
So having watched the video for this week, let's look at the questions, and I will offer my own thoughts and reflections and leave you to ponder for yourselves. Question 1. What did you find most helpful, inspiring or challenging in what Pete Gregg, Gemma Hunt and Alan Emerson shared? I think for me there are two things. Firstly, the quote that Pete used towards the beginning of the video, where he was quoting someone who said that as Jesus was uttering those words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was at this point that Christ became the atheist. I don't know why, but that certainly made me sit up and listen. I'd never thought about it in that way before, and I think I found it quite inspiring and helpful. The other thing is probably the way in which Pete broke down unanswered prayer as being attributed to three things: God's world, God's will, and God's war. I found each of the sections where Pete was explaining these things both interesting and also helpful. Question 2. If you could ask God one why question, what would it be? Well, I think the thing that springs into my mind is a situation that I was called to in my capacity as a part-time chaplain at the local hospital. I received a phone call during the summer of last year from the consultant in A&E, asking me if I could come to a family whose 7-year-old daughter had been killed in a road traffic collision. The family were Christians, and their own minister was on her way, but they decided that they would like to see the hospital chaplain too. Understandably, emotions were running very high. There was anger, there were tears, and there was also that unanswerable question of why. The next question on the cross, Jesus asks God, "Why have you forsaken me?" Would anyone be willing to describe a time when you felt abandoned or deserted by God, when you needed him most? I feel that I have to return to that situation at the hospital when the parents of that little girl were told that their daughter had died. They felt very much that God had abandoned them at that time. They needed God to make everything better. They needed God to have stopped the car. They needed God to change the outcome. They needed God to turn back the clock and to make the decisions that were made different ones. They wanted their little girl still to be alive. I have no idea what I said to those parents at such a devastating time in their lives, but I do believe that God gave me the words to say and then I exercised something that was mentioned later in the video by Alan Emerson, the ministry of presence. Just being there was what they needed most at that time. The next question is based on God's will. It says in the book of Isaiah, God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." Looking back on past disappointments, does anyone have an example of a time when God knew best, even though you didn't think so at the time? This seems rather lame compared to the parents who had lost their little girl. But for me, this was probably the time when I started part-time training for ministry, and I really struggled to cope with the fact that things just didn't work out, and I was forced to stop. Eventually, I realised that God's plan for me was to train full-time, and that this would be much more manageable. God knew best, but I certainly didn't think so at the time. Question 5. Why do we find it so hard to trust God? I think all of us, if we're being totally honest, want to be in control of the things that happen to us in our lives. When things are going well, we have no reason to question. We're quite happy to say that we trust in God completely. But it's in the times when things happen that we weren't expecting, things that seem unfair or difficult to understand, that we find it most difficult to trust in God. I found it amazing to hear the story of Alan Emerson and of his wife's untimely death. It was totally incredible to hear that even in his darkest times, he was able to, in his own words, embrace the mystery of God. I'm not sure if I would have been able to do the same, if I'm being honest. The next question is based on God's world. Pete Greig quotes C.S. Lewis saying that the very conception of a common and therefore stable world demands that miracles should be extremely rare. Do you agree with this? Well, I think I do, although this is particularly hard when you're the one praying that God will do something about a situation that you're facing. It was interesting to note the big difference that Pete pointed out between the couples praying to God for good weather on the day that their wedding was going to happen, compared to some of the terrible things that are happening in the world. Just at the moment, most of our prayers to God seem to pale into insignificance compared to our prayers for the people of Ukraine and the dreadful situation that is happening in that particular part of God's world. The next question is, should we pray less for miracles or simply trust more when our prayers aren't answered in the way we want? I think it's absolutely human nature for those of us who are Christians to continue to pray to God, and sometimes our prayers are genuinely seeking a miracle from God relating to our situation. I don't think we can ever tell people that they need to pray less for a miracle. We understand that miracles are not everyday occurrences. If they were, they wouldn't be miracles at all. Some prayers seem to be answered, whilst others don't. And as hard as it is, we need to accept that reality. But I don't think it should stop us asking God for a miracle. The next question is based on God's war. Question 8 says, is it possible for tragedy not to be God's fault? Do you agree with Pete Greig's statement that we tend to blame God for things that are Satan's doing? I absolutely agree that tragedies do just happen. If it's regarding an illness, then we just have to look at how complex the human condition is. It's a total miracle that everything works in the way that it does, and when certain things happen, then we can't always blame God. An illness is not the work of God, it just happens, regardless of how unfair it seems to be. This reminds me of Gemma's comment about praying for her friend to become a Christian. There are so many forces at work, and those forces are my will, God's will, her will, and the devil's will. Sometimes things are Satan's doing, which is why we need to stay on our guard and try to keep one step ahead. Question 9 says, does anyone have an experience of spiritual warfare that they can share? I don't think I can think of a particular situation that I will put down to spiritual warfare, but there are times when all of us are tempted to do what we know to be wrong. Whether that's taking a shortcut when we're doing something and hoping that nobody will notice, or being tempted to tell a little white lie in order to make ourselves look better. It actually reminds me of something I mentioned in a school assembly some time ago that was based on integrity. The phrase, doing the right thing even when no one is watching, is pretty powerful when thinking about this particular question. Next, it says Alan Emerson shares about the power of hope alongside the reality of pain. And the question is, do we as a community lean too much on one side of this equation, either focusing so much on hope that we aren't honest about pain, or focusing so much on pain that we fail to have hope? How can we hold both hope and pain together? This question made me think about the report to Methodist Conference in 2016, which was a model statement on living with contradictory convictions. It is difficult to strike a healthy balance at times, but if we're able to hold on to the power of hope, whilst acknowledging the reality of pain that we're suffering, then that surely has to absolutely be the healthiest place to be. Next week's session will explore Holy Saturday and the mystery of God's silence. We'll be asking the question, where? Where on earth are you, God, when heaven is silent and your Son lies dead in the grave? We're encouraged to read chapters 11 and 12 of God on Mute in order to get the most out of the session, but that is entirely up to us. Today we've tried to understand better the things we can and to trust better when we can't understand. Let's finish now with a prayer of relinquishment written by George MacDonald. It's not an easy prayer, but you may like to open your hands as a sign of surrender. Let's pray together. Afresh I seek thee. Lead me once more, I pray. Even should it be against my will, thy way. Let me not feel thee foreign any hour, or shrink from thee as an estranged power. Through doubt, through faith, through bliss, through stark dismay, through sunshine, wind, or snow, or fog, or shower, draw me to thee, who art my only day. Amen. I look forward to seeing you again next week, but until then, take care and God bless.